Managers, what was the most ridiculous, most exaggerated excuse an employee gave that turned out to be true? Story 1. I had a really good employee, one of the best. He always showed up on time, picked up extra shifts when needed, and had a great attitude. The only thing was, he was one of those super nice guys who never really had much luck with dating. He was kind but a little awkward around women, so it didn't happen often for him. One day, he was scheduled to work with me in about an hour. My phone rang, and it was him. He sounded both nervous and excited. He said he was at a coffee shop and had just started talking to a really pretty girl. To his surprise, she seemed interested in hanging out. He asked if there was any way someone could cover his shift. I laughed a little at first, but then realized he was being serious. I said, "You know what? Go enjoy yourself. I'll figure it out here." I honestly expected that the next time I saw him, he'd be a little down because maybe it didn't go well. But 2 days later, he came back to work and told me they were officially dating. He couldn't stop talking about her all shift. For the rest of the time he worked for me, they stayed together and seemed really happy. I don't know what happened after he left the company, but I honestly hope things worked out for them. Story 2. This is from my side of the story. My mom had passed away, and I needed to call her workplace to let them know. I phoned the store and asked to speak with the manager. When he picked up, I told him I was Charlotte's daughter. Right away, he spoke in a rude, sarcastic tone and said something like, "Oh, so she couldn't call to explain why she didn't show up to work yesterday?" I stayed calm and quietly replied, "No, she couldn't call because she passed away." There was total silence on the other end of the line. After a pause, he mumbled something and said that someone from HR would reach out to me. That was the end of the call. I honestly believe that moment stuck with him. I still think about it from time to time, and I really hope it taught him an important lesson. Sometimes being kind is more important than being right. Story 3. I was the employee in this story, but I'm pretty sure my boss felt bad afterward for not believing me. He was always suspicious when someone called in sick on a Friday or Monday. One Thursday night, I got a terrible headache, easily the worst I'd ever had. It was so bad I couldn't sleep at all. By Friday morning, I felt awful, so I called in and let him know I wouldn't be coming to work because of the headache. He sounded disappointed and just said, "See you Monday." After the call, I went to the mirror and noticed that one of my eyes looked off, and my vision was blurry. I decided to drive myself to the hospital. That's when they found out I had a tumor near my pituitary gland. I had to have surgery, and while I was in the hospital recovering, my boss came to visit me. Short version, my boss didn't believe my sick call. Turned out it was something serious, and he showed up at the hospital once he realized. Story 4. One day, I got a call from one of my employees. He told me he had been run over by his own car. At first, I didn't believe him. He explained that he had stepped out of his car to move a garbage bag that was in the way, but forgot to put the car in park. It rolled forward and ended up running over his foot and ankle, crushing it. It sounded like a strange excuse, so I had my doubts. But 2 days later, he showed up to work, on crutches, with a huge cast on his leg. He really needed the money, so I let him take it easy and just work the register and answer the phones while he recovered. Story 5. I once called out of work because of poison oak. At first, it probably sounded like I was just being dramatic, but I have really bad reactions to it. It spreads fast and causes swelling and painful blisters. I only have a photo of the rash on my arm, but it was actually all over. My face, neck, chest, back, and even one side of my hip. I didn't want to scare customers, so I asked to stay home for a few days. Because I also deal with anxiety, the doctor decided not to give me a steroid injection. Instead, I used strong medicated cream and sleeping pills so I could get some rest without being kept up by the constant itching. Story 6. I have 2 stories from the same job. Both times I was just an employee, not a manager. The first time, I couldn't make it to work because something truly tragic had happened. My stepfather had lost his life in a violent situation involving someone he was secretly seeing, and that person's spouse. All 3 of them actually worked at the same place. It was a shocking event, and when I called in to explain, my boss didn't believe me at all. He thought I was making it up, until the whole thing ended up on the front page of the newspaper the next day. After that, management gave me a bunch of sincere apologies. The second time, I was on my way to work and got hit hard at a 3-way stop. I had stopped and was turning left when another driver sped through his stop sign going way too fast, around 45 or 50 miles per hour. Because of the way the road curved, I only had about 2 seconds to see him, and there was no time to react. I called my manager, and I could tell he didn't fully believe me, probably thought it was another excuse. But later that day, some customers came into the store and told my boss they had seen me by the side of the road in my work uniform, holding one of my headlights. That confirmed my story, and it definitely saved me from more doubt. Story 7. I've had a bunch of days off work that probably sounded totally fake. One time, I was working as a supervisor at a call center and had a dentist appointment before my shift. I thought it would just be a regular cleaning, but the dentist said I needed a deeper cleaning under the gum line. That kind of work needs a lot more numbing, so they had to freeze one whole side of my mouth. They also split the treatment into 2 visits. When I left the office, I tried to call in, but I could barely talk. It sounded like I had something seriously wrong with me because of how numb my mouth was. And working in a call center, speaking clearly is kind of important. The person who answered the phone at work could hardly understand me, so I decided to stop by in person since the dentist's office was just around the corner. I walked in and tried to explain the situation to my manager. He took one look at my half-frozen, droopy face, heard me trying to say sorry, and just burst out laughing. He sent me home, and I made sure to book the second half of the treatment on my day off. Story 8. I wasn't a manager, but during college I had a summer job working construction for a gas company. There was another college kid on the crew whose dad also worked for the company. He was often late, and the rest of the crew, along with our supervisor, used to tease him about it. One morning, he showed up late again, looking stressed. The crew started joking right away, asking, "All right, what's your excuse this time?" He started to say, "I swear, the special police team." But before he could even finish, everyone in the room burst out laughing. They thought it was just another wild excuse. Once the laughter died down, he explained that a special unit really had blocked off his entire street because they were doing a raid on his neighbor's house. Turns out, he was telling the truth. His dad later confirmed that the street had been blocked that morning, and several people couldn't leave their homes in time for work. It ended up being a funny story, especially because no one believed him at first. Story 9. This was my own excuse, and it happened on my very first day at a new job. For some reason, I was having horrible stomach pain and felt like I really needed to use the restroom. I went in, thinking it'd be quick, but nothing happened. I sat there for about 30 minutes trying to go, but no luck. Every time I gave up and headed for the door, the pain would hit me again, and I'd rush back in. This went on for almost 2 hours. Finally, my boss came in and asked if I was okay. I was super embarrassed, but I had to tell him what was going on. He told me to just head home and come back the next day. So I left, picked up some medicine that usually helps with this kind of thing, and hoped it would solve everything. But it didn't. The pain only got worse, and eventually, I had to go to the emergency room. Turns out I had a severe blockage in my system, about the size of a softball. The doctor said it was probably because of my diet at the time. I was going to the gym a lot and eating huge, high-calorie, high-protein meals to bulk up. I ended up staying in the hospital for 3 days while they took care of it. Some of the methods they used. Let's just say I don't ever want to talk about them. At first, my employer wasn't sure about keeping me since I disappeared on day 1. But with doctors' notes and updates, they gave me another chance, and I ended up working there for the next 6 years. Story 10. Man, I'm late to the conversation, but I've got a good one. One of my coworkers once called in and told our manager he couldn't come to work because the whole street was blocked off by a special police unit, and they were using his car for cover. He wasn't exactly known for being the most honest guy, so no one really believed him at first. He kept saying it was true and mentioned that there were even news cameras outside. So the manager went to the break room, turned on the local news, and there it was. The entire street outside his apartment was full of police vehicles and special units getting ready to arrest someone wanted for a serious crime in the building next to his. And yes, right there on the screen, plain as day, was his Toyota Corolla being used as cover. Story 11. I got a phone call one Friday, and the woman on the line said, "Hi, I'm Name's girlfriend. He won't be coming into work for a few days. He was scheduled to work that weekend, Saturday and Sunday." I explained that he needed to call in himself, but she replied in a very quiet, serious voice, "He won't be able to make the call." And that was it. We went back and forth for a bit, and I started getting frustrated especially since he was part of the management team. I was also starting to get genuinely worried. So I began calling around to the hospitals in the area, thinking maybe something serious had happened. Finally, I checked one last place, the local detention center. Turns out, he had been arrested for driving under the influence Friday night and wouldn't be able to see a judge until Monday. Story 12. One time, I re-injured my ribs. I had originally hurt them during a staged fight, and they were almost healed, but then I messed them up again trying to climb onto a roof without a ladder. I'm a roofer, and we had accidentally left the ladder on the roof, so I was trying to get up there to grab it. While I was driving back to the shop, my dad called me and told me my grandmother had just passed away. So I had to walk into my boss's office and tell him I wouldn't be coming in for about 2 weeks because I had re-injured my ribs and lost my grandma. His response: "Shouldn't you be coughing up blood or something?" The joke was on him though, because a few days later, one of my co-workers brought in the obituary and showed it to him. Story 13. I wasn't a manager, but I had to call in for my mom once. We lived in the same apartment building, so we often rode together. She'd either drop me off on her way to work or pick me up afterward, depending on her shift. One morning, we were driving to work when we saw that our usual road was blocked. We asked the worker directing traffic what happened, and he said a beaver had chewed through a power pole, causing it to fall across the road. We had to take a detour. My mom dropped me off first, but since she was going to be late, she asked me to call her boss and let him know what happened. When I explained the situation, he started laughing and said, "Beavers. That's exactly why I stay away from them." Her manager had a great sense of humor, and it definitely made the situation less stressful. Story 14. I was an employee in a senior role where I also helped support customer accounts by handling the technical side of things for the sales team. When I decided to leave the company, I did it the right way. I wrote a formal resignation letter, told my manager in a one-on-one meeting, gave 3 weeks' notice, and informed my customers and third-party partners. I even sent out a goodbye email to the whole company. It definitely wasn't a secret. But one sales manager, who worked in a region that didn't have enough engineering support, completely missed all of that. He scheduled a meeting with a customer and expected me to be there. He even sent me the flight and rental car info, assuming I'd be joining him. Then he called me from the airport, asking where I was so we could meet up and get the rental car. He thought I had booked it. I told him I didn't work there anymore, that I'd finished my notice period, taken a short vacation, and was now at my new job sitting in a new office. He absolutely didn't believe me. It was like he thought I was making up an excuse to get out of the trip. There was a lot of confusion, some raised voices, and finally a 3-way call with the CEO before he finally accepted I had actually quit. Story 15. A friend of mine is a police officer. One day, he was working security at a big sports event, and part of his job was to make sure no one parked in handicapped spots without the proper permit or ID. All day, he kept hearing wild stories from people trying to talk their way into parking there. But if they didn't have the right documentation, he had to turn them away. Then a large van pulled up and tried to park in one of the reserved spots. He asked the driver for a handicap permit, but the driver said, "I don't have one, but the woman with me was just released from the hospital after being attacked by a panther." My friend had already heard all kinds of strange excuses that day, so he told the driver to park in the regular lot since there was no official ID. The van drove off toward the back. A few minutes later, my friend watched as the doors opened and the passengers got out. And sure enough, a woman in a wheelchair rolled out, covered in bandages, with her hospital wristband still on. Story 16. One morning, I was running a little late for work. Nothing major, just overslept by about 10 to 15 minutes. My husband was just leaving for his job, and I gave him a quick goodbye kiss before hopping in the shower. After a fast shower, I grabbed a towel and went to open the bathroom door, but it wouldn't budge. Confused, I realized what had happened. Our new kitten, just 14 weeks old, must have tried to jump up onto the bathroom counter where our other cat was lounging in the sink. In the process, he pulled open one of the vanity drawers. That drawer was now sticking out just enough to block the door from opening. I was stuck, and I was not happy. I shouted a few choice words out loud, probably loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "You've got to be kidding me." Then I took a deep breath and tried to think logically. Could I call someone? Nope. My phone was sitting on the bathroom counter, just out of reach. Waiting for my husband to come home was out of the question. He wouldn't be back for 8 hours, and I had clients later that day. I looked around the bathroom for anything I could use to push the drawer closed through the small crack in the door. All I had was toilet paper and shampoo bottles. Not helpful. So, I did what any frustrated, slightly panicked person would do. I started throwing my weight against the door. I heard it crack. Okay, I thought, this door is cheap composite wood. Maybe I can break through. So I kept pushing and banging the door until I started leaving bruises on myself. All the while, I was still wet and wrapped in a towel. Eventually, I managed to break through a piece of the door. I got my fingers through the opening and began pulling pieces off from the inside. Victory. But wait, I needed to reach the drawer itself. So I broke off another smaller piece from the other side, peeked through, and saw my sweet little kitten sitting on the other side of the door, staring at me like I was the crazy one. Finally, I was able to get my hand through the hole far enough to close the drawer that had trapped me. I got out, tired, bruised, and running 30 to 45 minutes late for work. Thankfully, I didn't have any early clients that day. Story 17. I was working a shift one day with my manager when our new assistant manager didn't show up. It was strange, she had only been with us a few weeks, and she didn't call in or send any kind of message. After about an hour, I started to get a really bad feeling about it. She had a friend who also worked with us, and since they were close, I gave him a call and asked if he could check in on her. He called me back and said he went to her apartment and found blood on the floor, and she had a serious head injury. It turned out she had been the victim of a violent crime. Later, I got a couple of calls from the police, and they asked me questions, especially about her friend. I never found out what really happened, or if he had anything to do with it. A month or two later, she came back to work with a large scar on her forehead. That was one of the wildest and most disturbing days I've ever had at work. Story 18. I was the employee in this story. My boss at the time was a good person, but he had a habit of making people feel bad whenever they called out sick. One morning, I was crossing the street in front of our office building when a car hit me. It knocked me down, but thankfully I wasn't seriously injured, just some bruises and a sprained ankle. Several of my coworkers saw it happen and rushed over to help. There was no question about what had happened. An ambulance showed up, but I stubbornly told them I was okay. I called a family member to pick me up and, in the meantime, limped up to my desk to wait. While I was sitting there, my boss asked if I could still work the whole day. I looked at him and said, "Did you not see the car that just hit me?" I ended up taking the next 3 days off. But each day, he still asked me why I needed more time off. Story 19. I was at work one day when my husband called and said, "You need to come home. Right now." The tone of his voice scared me, so I told my manager something was wrong at home and I had to leave immediately. She looked worried, but let me go. Before I could even reach my car, my husband was already there in the parking lot waiting for me. When I walked up to him, he looked at me with teary, panicked eyes. "She's gone, isn't she?" I asked, meaning my mom, who had been very sick. He replied, "She's dying. They have her on life support, but they need your permission to remove it. Your dad got overwhelmed and left the hospital, and your brother's still on a plane." I just started laughing, not because it was funny, but because sometimes that's all you can do. There I was, standing in a parking lot, realizing I had to make the decision to let my mom go, by phone, from 7,000 miles away. So we went home and I started making calls. The strange part? The doctors had given her so much medicine to try to restart her heart that she couldn't pass right away. They were stunned. The medicine was supposed to wear off in 30 minutes. It took nearly 6 hours. Once I knew I'd be flying home and not coming back to work for a while, I went back to my job to let them know. I told my manager, "My mom is dying. I need to go home for a while." She just stared at me, speechless. 2 coworkers started crying right there. I smiled gently and said, "It's okay, really. She's been in a lot of pain. I'm not sure when I'll be back, but I'll try to find someone to cover my shifts." Still, no one said anything. Then another manager came over, understood what was happening, and said, "It's all right, we'll handle it. You can go." When I returned about a month later, no one knew how to talk to me. The moment I walked in, people started crying again. And honestly, comforting them over my mom's passing was one of the most surreal and emotionally draining experiences I've ever had. Story 20. My family and I were going out of town for the holidays, so we needed to board our 2 dogs and our rabbit. The rabbit was a French Angora, about the same size as one of our small dogs. The boarding place was close to my job, so the plan was to drop them off on my way to work. But due to a misunderstanding with the woman who ran the kennel, she wasn't able to take the rabbit. It was about -10 degrees Fahrenheit outside and snowing, and I had the rabbit in a small pet carrier in the car. There was no way I could leave her out in the cold all day while I was at work. So I had to walk into work, explain the situation, and tell my supervisor that I had a bunny emergency and needed to go home. Story 21. Back in my senior year of college, I was working as an assistant manager at a tanning salon. One weekend, a night of partying turned into a morning of still partying. I was supposed to open the store on Sunday, but I ended up showing up an hour late, and still very out of it. I had tried calling everyone I could to cover my shift, but no one was available. When I finally made it in, my boss was already there, and he was not happy. I felt so awful, I ended up getting sick behind the front counter. He put me on probation after that, and honestly, I deserved it. I'd been working at that place for almost 4 years, and I was at a really low point in my life. That moment was kind of a wake-up call. I realized I was heading down a path I didn't want to stay on. Funny enough, shortly after that, I had to leave the job anyway because I got a summer internship. After the internship ended, I started working at a liquor store, right before graduating college. Story 22. At my job, you're only allowed to call out if you have sick time saved up. Part-timers earn about 2 hours of sick time per month, and full-timers earn 4 hours. If you don't have enough and you miss work, even for a serious medical issue, you can get written up or even fired. It doesn't matter if you're in the emergency room for something dangerous like a severe asthma attack. No sick time. That's too bad. Bleeding from an ulcer? Still not enough. Even if you have a kidney infection that's getting close to turning into something life-threatening, they expect you to first show up at work, so a manager can release you to the emergency room. They want to make sure it's serious. To be fair, I think this policy is mostly specific to my store, not the whole company. The managers at our location are really into health and fitness and seem to believe that people only get sick because they don't work out or take enough supplements. Not because, some of us inherited half our medical problems from our families. Story 23. I was 16 at the time. A few weeks earlier, my boss had told me I was doing a great job and to keep up the good work. Then I came down with strep throat and completely lost my voice, which was a big problem since my job involved a lot of talking. I couldn't call in myself, so my dad called in for me. 2 weeks later, I showed up for a shift and found out I'd been fired. They claimed that if I was really that sick, I should have called in myself, and they accused my boyfriend of calling in for me instead. I told them it was my dad, but they didn't believe me, even though I had a doctor's note confirming I had been seriously sick. It was really upsetting, especially at 16. And the worst part, I didn't even have a boyfriend. Story 24. I was the employee in this story. One morning, I found my mom's boyfriend had passed away during the night. It was a huge shock. I was scheduled to work that day, so I called my manager and explained what had happened. She told me, "You don't get time off if it's not a direct family member." I was stunned and just hung up the phone. His son, who's like an adopted older brother to me, and I had to make funeral plans, so I called again later and said I'd be taking the rest of the week off. At the funeral, the owner of the company showed up. He apologized for how I had been treated, told me to take as much time as I needed, and even made a generous donation to help cover the costs. We had been asking for help because we couldn't afford everything ourselves. I eventually went back to work, but then another manager fired me. The reason? They claimed I had been rude to a customer on a day I hadn't even been at work. Story 25. One time, I had to call into work because there was an armed standoff happening on my street. I live on a dead-end road, so there was only one way out, and it was completely blocked. From what I heard later, a man with known mental health issues had gotten into a serious argument with his landlords. He had a weapon and was threatening them. He lived just a few houses down from me, in a small apartment above a garage, close enough that I could see it from my balcony. What I saw for myself was a group of about 10 police officers surrounding the place, and the man standing on his balcony in nothing but underwear, waving a weapon in the air. I immediately went back inside to stay safe, called in to let work know I was going to be late, and started making dinner while waiting it out. While I was cooking, I suddenly heard several gunshots. When everything finally calmed down, I stepped outside to ask around and find out what happened. Neighbors said that the man had fired at the officers, and one of them was hit in the leg. In response, the other officers returned fire. Both the man and the injured officer were taken to the hospital. I was told that the man didn't make it, though I didn't see that part myself. Once the road was cleared, I called work again and told them I'd be on my way. Management was really understanding. And of course, when I finally got to work, I had to tell that wild story to every single coworker for the next few days. Story 26. This is from my point of view as the employee. I was home from college for winter break and picked up some shifts at my old part-time job. I had already worked a few days and made a good impression on the new general manager. One week, I worked a closing shift from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. on Thursday and was scheduled to open at 6 a.m. the next morning. Around 8:30 p.m. during that Thursday shift, my right eye started to feel really irritated. I wear a contact lens in that eye, so I figured it was just dry or bothering me. I finished work, went home, and took the contact out. My eye looked red and swollen. I used some eye drops and went to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, I couldn't open my right eye at all. I went to the bathroom and turned on the light, and the pain from the light was intense. Some background. I'm completely blind in my left eye because of a past eye surgery, and my right eye has really bad vision. A few months before, I had an injury to my right eye that was pretty serious. So when this happened, I was genuinely scared. If anything happened to my right eye, I'd basically be blind. At 5:30 a.m., I called my manager and explained that I thought I had another injury to my good eye and that I could barely see. His response: "Well, just come in. We'll try to find something for you to do." I told my mom what he said, and she agreed to drive me there. But on the way, my eye started watering like crazy, and I realized there was no way I could work. I walked into the store and found my manager in the back. He took one look at me and said, "Oh man, are you okay?" He asked if I could just clean the dining area. At that point, I said something no one in food service wants to hear. "I think it might be pink eye." His face changed immediately. "You need to go home," he said. A few hours later, I was at the doctor's office. The doctor told me it was a pretty deep eye abrasion, and I was lucky I came in when I did. Story 27. Worst week of my life. My manager went on vacation, but instead of actually leaving town, she just stayed at home. She left me in charge of everything. One of our regular employees had recently disappeared without notice, and we had 2 new hires. One had been with us for 2 weeks, and the other was supposed to start on Monday. The new guy never showed up. The other one, the one with 2 weeks of experience, ended up in the hospital because of a serious gallbladder issue. He was in so much pain from gallstones that he couldn't work. That left just 3 people on the team, including me. One of them flat out refused to take on extra shifts. So it came down to me and the other guy. We spent every day calling every other store in the area, trying to find someone, anyone, who could help cover shifts. I even called my manager, and all she said was, "Just don't tell HR what's going on." She still got in trouble later. So for that whole week, it was just me and one coworker working both day and night shifts. We were completely burned out. Oh, and just to top things off, that same week, my boyfriend of 7 years broke up with me for someone else. But here's the twist. The coworker who was in the hospital? The one no one believed at first. He later introduced me to the man who became my husband. Story 28. I used to be a manager at a 24/7 security station inside what was, at the time, the world's largest data center. We were required to have 1 manager and 2 officers on duty at all times, so when someone called out, it really messed things up. But call-outs happened all the time. Company policy said we had to try to convince the person to come in anyway, so I often had to talk people through it. As someone who deals with chronic health issues myself, I was always more understanding when the reason was legit. One day, though, I got a call from an officer who had a history of being late, skipping shifts, and generally being unreliable. He sounded flustered, but I still had to ask the usual question. "Why are you calling off?" With a completely serious tone, he said, "I think I grew a second butt." I quickly said, "Okay," hung up the phone, and then burst out laughing. A week later, he came back with a doctor's note. Turns out, he had a severe medical condition, specifically very painful tears that had caused serious issues. He wasn't exaggerating at all. I felt pretty bad for not believing him right away and apologized. He took it well, and we both laughed about it later. Story 29. Last spring, In April, it was the end of the winter term. On my way to my final exam, I found out that one of my grandmothers had passed away, and the rest of my family had gotten the chance to say goodbye. This came after losing an uncle and my other grandmother just 5 and 4.5 months earlier. Both of them passed while I was away at school, so I never got the chance to see them either. What made everything harder was that I missed my uncle's funeral, and I had to leave right after we buried my grandmother because I was only allowed to miss 2 classes. With school stress and all the losses, plus the passing of a family friend's child just before the school year started, everything became too much. But I didn't realize how deeply it was affecting me until the next term, around late April or early May, when I fell into a depression. I ended up failing 2 classes because I was too stubborn to ask for help or see a grief counselor. Story 30. I wasn't the manager, I was the employee. I worked at a motorcycle shop and owned both a sport bike and a car. I had let my sister borrow my car for a week while she was applying for jobs and going to interviews, since I could get around on my motorcycle. One morning, I walked outside, opened the garage, and saw my bike sitting there, but the back wheel was gone. Someone had stolen it, and the bike was resting on the swing arm. I called my boss and said, "Steve, someone took the rear wheel off my Gixxer. I have to wait for the police to come take a report before I can head to work." At first, he thought I was joking and told me to stop messing around and just come in, so I sent him a photo of the bike. He replied a few minutes later and told me to take the day off, because, in his words, that's one of the worst things to wake up to. Story 31. I was at work one day in a pharmacy, and of course, it was during a really busy shift, and someone had already called out. While I was looking in the fridge for a vaccine, I hit my head pretty hard. I saw stars and had to sit down for a minute because I couldn't stand. My manager asked if I was okay, and I brushed it off and kept working. I felt all right for a few minutes, but while talking to a patient, I suddenly got really confused. I couldn't understand what they were saying, and I started to feel sick. I told my boss I wasn't feeling well, but he asked me to just push through it since we were already short on staff. I tried, but then I passed out in the middle of a conversation with another patient. They took me to the hospital, and it turns out I had a pretty bad concussion. Story 32. I was managing a movie theater when one of my teenage employees walked up to me and said she needed to go home. Not asked, just told me. I looked at her, waiting for her to laugh like it was a joke, but she was completely serious. I was confused for a second, then said, "Get back to work." She told me she couldn't. I asked why, and she said she had an accident in her pants. I was still thinking she was messing with me, so I repeated myself, not taking it seriously. She said again that she was serious and that she couldn't stay at work. I still didn't believe her until the smell hit me, and I realized she was telling the truth. She started crying, saying over and over again that it had really happened, and I hadn't believed her. I suddenly found myself standing there with a teenager in tears, trying to explain that she'd had an accident, and I had treated her like she was making it up. I asked what happened, and she said she got scared when she heard me coming down the stairs and panicked so badly that she lost control. She was so nervous around me that it led to that moment, because I had made work that stressful for her. Not long after, she quit. And honestly, I don't blame her. Story 33. I worked at a Hollywood video for a few years and had a coworker named Russ. He was an older guy who worked night shifts just to make a little extra money. He and his wife were both retired. He seemed like a regular guy and was well known in the community. He had been a high school principal for 15 years. One day, Russ called before his shift and told our manager that he had to quit, but he couldn't explain why. The manager hung up, and we were all a little surprised. We figured something serious must have happened and hoped he was okay. Months passed, and honestly, I forgot all about it, until one of my coworkers came in for his shift and told me to look up Russ's name online. So I did, and what I found shocked me. Turns out, Russ had been hiding a major secret. He was actually waiting for a court case when he got hired, and somehow, the company never caught it during the hiring process. He had once been a school principal and even taught swimming lessons to kids during the summer. But the person we worked with was also someone facing serious legal trouble. He worked with us for a whole year and was around families and kids regularly. It really made me realize you never truly know who someone is when the doors are closed. Story 34. It was a Friday night, and I was the manager in charge of closing a section at a big electronics store. The job wasn't great. Honestly, It could be really frustrating. Around 8 p.m., one of my employees started looking rough. He said he had a terrible stomach ache, but since it was a Friday closing shift, usually one of the worst, I figured maybe he just wanted to leave early and start his weekend. Still, I didn't want to be the kind of manager who pushes people when they're not feeling well. So I said, "Hey, if you're really feeling that bad, go ahead and head out. I know tonight's shift is rough, and if you're sick, I don't want you stuck here feeling worse." He left right away and went straight to the hospital. Turned out his appendix had burst. He had to have emergency surgery, but thankfully he was okay. To this day, I'm really grateful I didn't try to force him to stay. It could have ended very differently if he hadn't gotten help when he did. Story 35. I was the manager on duty at a nice gym one day when some rough weather started moving in. It was right around the time when the first shift was ending and the second shift was starting. Then I got a phone call. The person said, "Hey, there's a tornado. I'm not coming in." We have like 10 different departments, so when someone calls out, it usually doesn't cause a big problem. I just shrugged and figured they were being overly cautious. I had lived in the area for 15 years and had never seen a tornado warning actually amount to anything. Plus, at that moment, it wasn't even raining and the wind was calm. But then, about 30 seconds later, I got another call. This time it was the front desk saying a different employee was on the line and also wasn't coming in. I answered and she said, "There's a tornado in the area. I'm staying home." That's when I had a real oh moment. We had around 150 flat screen TVs playing music channels, and none of them were showing any weather alerts. So I rushed into one of the side offices and pulled up a local weather site on the computer. Sure enough, a tornado was headed straight toward us. I immediately ran back out, told the front desk to make an announcement, and have everyone move to the locker rooms on the bottom floor. Then I went out into the parking lot to warn anyone outside, and even checked the outdoor pool area to make sure no one was there. Thankfully, the tornado missed us by a few miles and didn't cause any major damage. But that was the last time I ever doubted someone calling out because of bad weather. Story 36. This was probably the strangest and most honest call-in I've ever gotten. One Friday morning, an employee called to say she wasn't coming in. She was a solid worker overall, though she'd had a few attendance issues recently. I asked why she wasn't coming in, and she replied, "Look, you really don't want to know." I told her I still needed a reason. She sighed and said, "I woke up this morning, and it feels like I have a second backside." I was about to joke and ask if she had picked up another boyfriend. But luckily, I didn't say it out loud. The silence after her answer was something else. I just said, "Okay, I hope you feel better." A week later, she came in and explained that she had developed a serious tear and had to have emergency surgery. I couldn't help but laugh like a middle schooler and said, "Well, sounds like they patched that up pretty quick, huh?" She laughed too and said she'd be back to work the following week. Story 37. This one's actually about my husband, who was the manager in this situation. He had a new employee who had just moved from another state and was in his second week of training. Then, out of nowhere, the guy stopped showing up. No calls, no messages, just disappeared. A few days later, my husband got a frantic call from him. The employee explained that he had met a woman at a bar, and they ended up going back to a house 2 towns away. It was supposed to be just a one-night thing, but things went very wrong. According to him, she had drugged him. When he finally woke up, 2 days later, his car, his wallet, and all his clothes were gone. To make matters worse, she had handcuffed him to the bed. He eventually managed to get help and ended up at the local police station. My husband drove out there, brought him some clothes, and picked him up. As crazy as it all sounded, everything the employee said turned out to be true. Story 38. I know I'm late to share, but I'm a manager and I used to work with another manager who I've known for years. She's amazing, hardworking, reliable, and only ever calls out if something serious is going on. I completely trust her. One day, she didn't show up for her shift. That was really unlike her. I waited a few minutes, thinking maybe her young daughter was making the morning a bit hectic. Things happen when you're getting both yourself and a kid ready. But by 15 minutes past her start time, I got worried. I called her, no answer. Then I called my boss to ask if anyone had a number for her husband. Right as I did, she called me back. She said she had just finished speaking with the police and was really sorry. She said she'd explain later. She came into work, and I immediately asked what had happened. She told me she was getting ready for work when a well-dressed woman, probably in her 50s, knocked on her door. The woman said she had walked up the hill to visit her friend, using the actual name of one of my coworker's neighbors, and said her friend wasn't home. She asked if she could please have a glass of water because it was hot out. My coworker didn't want to let a stranger inside, so she brought a glass of water to the door and told the woman she had to finish getting ready for work. But then the woman pretended she was going to faint and said she just needed to sit down for a minute. Worried the woman might actually collapse, my coworker let her inside and told her to sit on the couch. Just then, her daughter called her from another room. As she turned to go, she saw the woman messing with something in her purse. When she got to the other room, she noticed her own purse was next to the woman, and the wallet, which had been sitting on top, was gone. She went back, opened the woman's purse, saw her wallet inside, and immediately told the woman to leave. She called the police, and luckily they caught the woman not long after. My coworker felt awful because she realized she had put her daughter at risk without meaning to. And honestly, I felt terrible too. She's one of the kindest, most thoughtful people I've ever worked with. Apparently, the woman had taken the neighbor's name from a piece of mail left in their mailbox. That's how she made her story seem believable. Story 39. This one isn't exactly a sick day story, but still worth sharing. During my first week at a new job with a big company, my manager thought I had quit in the middle of the day because I disappeared and didn't come back for a while. What really happened was this. I stepped out to take a smoke break and accidentally took the wrong elevator. It brought me down into a massive underground parking garage that stretched beneath several buildings. The problem? You needed a security badge to get into or out of the garage, and I only had a temporary sticker badge with my name on it. Once you're in, you also need to scan your badge again just to access the elevators or stairwell. Since I was new, I didn't have any of that access. So there I was, completely stuck in the garage for over an hour and a half. No way out. No way to call for help either, because there was no cell signal down there. I even tried jumping up and down, waving at the security cameras, hoping someone would notice. Eventually, another employee showed up around midday and let me in. He was kind enough to walk me all the way back to my team and explain what had happened to my manager. Story 40. This actually happened to me back when I was working as a retail associate at a kiosk. One day, I accidentally left my keys on the counter, and when I went back to grab them, they were gone. I looked everywhere, but couldn't find them. Since I have a habit of misplacing things, no one really believed me when I said they were actually stolen. A few hours later, I got a call from a nearby police station. Turns out, someone had stolen my keys, driven about 20 minutes away, and then got caught shoplifting at another store. When the police went through his pockets, they found my keys, with a keychain that said Amber on it. That made them suspicious. They went to a Hallmark store, scanned the rewards card attached to my keychain, and pulled up my phone number. I had literally just signed up for that card earlier that week. They called me, and I got my keys back. To this day, I still have no idea why that guy would steal my keys. It's one of the weirdest things that's ever happened to me. Story 41. I was the one who was late to work that day. It was late morning, and I was getting ready for my evening shift when I suddenly heard glass breaking at my neighbor's house. Then more glass breaking, and then even more. Curious, I looked over the fence and saw a teenage boy carefully climbing through their bathroom window. I told him to leave immediately because I was calling the police. He took off, and I made the call. When the first officers arrived, they asked me to stick around so they could get a statement. I waited about 15 minutes, then another police car showed up, then a van, then 2 more patrol cars. Clearly, something bigger was going on, but I couldn't see much from my side of the fence. 3 hours later, 2 officers finally came over to talk to me. But they weren't just focused on the break-in anymore. Instead, they were very interested in the tall, leafy plants growing in the shaded area of the neighbor's backyard. Let's just say, that little garden wasn't exactly legal. Story 42. I had a coworker who was well known for never showing up to work. In 6 months, she had only worked 1 full week. One of her last excuses was pretty wild. She said her car ran out of gas, and she had to walk several miles along a snowy highway because no one would stop to help her. She said her fiancé eventually came looking for her since she'd been gone so long, but she couldn't come into work because she got sick from being out in the cold. Normally, I wouldn't have believed any of it. But the night before, when I was leaving work, I did see a car pulled over on the on-ramp. And a few miles down the highway, I saw someone walking along the shoulder. What's crazy is, I almost didn't notice the person because I was watching a car making a sudden U-turn on the other side of the highway. I was focused on that car in case it did something dangerous. When I finally looked back at my lane, I saw the person walking and thought, wow, I could have hit them if I hadn't looked up in time. But here's the part that made us all shake our heads. She walked about 7 miles to the next exit, even though the nearest gas station was actually less than a mile back in the other direction, toward work. She ended up being let go not long after. Her final excuse? She said a family member had been rushed to the hospital. But it turned out there was no emergency and no hospital visit. Story 43. This is the story of how I became a manager. About 2 years ago, the general manager at the time looked at me and said, "This bottle of Absolute was returned because the customer didn't like the vanilla flavor and wanted a different one." I looked at the bottle and asked, "If they just wanted a different flavor, why is it open?" He said, "The customer said they poured one drink before realizing it wasn't the flavor they wanted." But the bottle looked completely full. Then I noticed the price label and realized something was off. I told him, "Our pricing guns don't make this kind of label." He looked again and said, "Yeah, you're right." I opened the bottle and took a sniff. Nothing. It didn't smell like vodka. It didn't even smell like vanilla. It smelled like water. I looked at him, smiled, took a small sip, then looked him dead in the eye and said, "You just gave someone a refund for a bottle of water. Nice work." He tried to blame the cashier, but it had required his approval. Later, the owner called me in and asked what happened. I told him the truth. The owner had known me since I was 8 years old, so he knew I wouldn't lie. And not long after that, I got promoted. Story 44. Employee here. One morning I was walking to work and decided to cut through a parking lot. As I started heading down a set of stairs, I didn't notice a magazine lying face down on one of the steps. The glossy pages acted like ice. I stepped on it and immediately slipped cartoon style, like someone stepping on a banana peel. It definitely hurt, but I got up quickly and did the classic look around to see if anyone saw me. Thankfully, no witnesses. I kept walking, but about half a block later, I started feeling something strange around, well, the lower half of my body. A wave of panic hit. I reached around the front and back. Turns out I had completely ripped my pants at the inseam. The weird sensation I felt, that was a nice cold breeze in a place where no breeze should be. Let's just say I made my way back home as fast as possible, taking the smallest steps I could manage. I probably looked like someone who either really needed a restroom or like a power-walking mom on a mission. Story 45. Last summer, while working as a bartender in a busy resort town, I went camping for the weekend with some friends. I asked my boss for Sunday off, but he said no, and warned me that if I didn't show up, he'd find someone else who would. So I ended up driving 6 hours back, completely exhausted. About 2 hours from work, I crashed my car. Thankfully, I wasn't seriously hurt, but my car was totaled. I called my boss to say I wouldn't make it in. He hung up on me. I sent him a photo of the car and told him I'd still be there to open the bar the next morning. He replied that he didn't believe me and said I better hope he was in a good mood when I showed up. I caught a late-night train, 2.5 hours long with a 45-minute layover at 1 a.m. just to get back in time. I showed up at 11 a.m. to open the bar like I said I would. My manager started to give me attitude until he saw the cut on my forehead and the limp I had from the crash. After that, I never had any trouble getting a day off again. Story 46. I had a coworker who was known for coming up with wild excuses to leave work early, and most of the time, they clearly weren't true. One day, during a busy rush, he came up to me and said he needed to leave. I asked why, and he said never mind, and went back to work. About an hour later, he came back with a serious face and told me his brother had passed away in a terrible accident. Normally, that's something I would never question, but this was the third time he had told me a story like this, and the last 2 times turned out to be lies. Still, I let him leave so he'd stop bothering me. Later, I found out that this time, he was actually telling the truth. His brother really had passed away in the exact way he described. Even more heartbreaking, it happened just a week after his other brother's wife passed away, and about a month after his dad died. I honestly thought he was making it up again, but the boss ended up giving him a full week off to grieve. Story 47. I'm not a manager, but the excuse I had for being late to work definitely sounded unbelievable. So much so that my manager thought I was making it up. I had just started moving into a new apartment, but I couldn't finish everything in one night. I left my bed and slept at the old place, planning to go back to the new one in the morning to grab my work clothes, ID badge, and everything else I needed. The new apartment was only a block away, so I figured it would be a quick stop. But when I got there the next morning, the whole building was surrounded by police cars and fire trucks. The entire entrance was taped off. Turns out, the guy in the apartment right next to mine had set multiple aerosol cans on fire and then taken his own life. There was a small fire, and the whole hallway was black with smoke damage. His door had been warped from the heat, and my brand new apartment smelled like smoke for months. Everything I owned inside was covered in a thin layer of soot. We had to clean it all over again. I called my manager and tried to explain what happened. At first, he didn't believe me. It sounded too wild. But after a long pause, all he said was, "Come in when you can." Story 48. When I was in 10th grade, a friend of my mom's was staying with us. She worked as a dancer and was planning to take over the lease on our house, since we were going to move out in a few months. At the time, we were about 600 miles away from home, out of state. While we were gone, my mom got a phone call. Her friend's boyfriend had seriously hurt himself and was in a coma. We immediately started driving back, and during that trip, we got word that he had passed away. The situation was even more heartbreaking because of what happened behind the scenes. His ex-wife, who had legal power to make medical decisions for him, stepped in. She had already taken everything from him financially and was left in charge when he couldn't speak for himself. The doctors said he had a chance to survive, though he'd likely have lifelong disabilities. Even so, she made the call to end his care. There's a lot more to this story, and it gets even more complicated, but that's the part one feel comfortable sharing. Story 49. I'm not a manager, but I once had to call out of work for a very serious reason. My mother, who had been sober for 7 years, suddenly started drinking again. Only it wasn't regular alcohol. She had been secretly drinking mouthwash for about a month. When my dad and I found out, she was completely out of it. When we confronted her, she harmed herself. We rushed her to the emergency room, and the doctors said her blood alcohol level was extremely high, just from the mouthwash. I called my job 2 hours before my shift and told them I couldn't come in because of a family emergency. They actually asked me to explain what the emergency was. I told them, and they responded with a sarcastic, "Oh, all right." The next day, they called me into the office and said, "You already get 2 days off a week. We know things happen, but try not to take more time off just for alone time." I quit a few months later. Honestly, working in retail really showed me how little some managers care about what people are going through. Story 50. One night, I went to see Bless the Fall live. After the show, the drummer tossed his drumsticks into the crowd, and somehow, I ended up with a broken one lodged in my wrist. A couple of my friends rushed me to the emergency room. The next morning, I called in to let my manager know I couldn't come to work. His response, "Haha, nice one, Danny." And I got stabbed with a chopstick. Come to work. He didn't believe me until I sent him a photo. Seriously, who throws a broken drumstick into a crowd? I actually pulled it out myself at the show once I realized what had happened. My friends even got it signed for me afterward. Honestly, totally worth it. Story 51. The weirdest excuse I've ever had for missing work was when my hometown finally decided to repave the roads around my parents' house. I couldn't drive to work because the construction crew was out pouring tar, laying asphalt, the full process. No cars were allowed on the road because they didn't want anyone getting stuck. Even a police officer was there helping direct traffic. My dad was furious when he got home from work, and the officer told him he couldn't drive on the street for a few more hours until everything had set properly. I called my manager to explain, but he didn't believe me. I even went outside, took pictures of the workers, and even snapped a selfie with the huge paving machine. Still, he didn't buy it. Honestly, he never believed anything. He wasn't the easiest person to work for anyway. Story 52. Excuse maker here. I've been getting migraines since I was about 19 or 20. I'm 26 now, and they come with really intense visual symptoms. Before the actual headache hits, I get what's called an aura. Basically, I lose part of my vision, usually in one eye. Thankfully, it doesn't happen often anymore thanks to some medication changes, but back then, it was a regular issue. When it wasn't under control yet, I had to go up to my manager more than once and say something like, "Hey, I can't see out of my left eye right now. I need to head out soon or I won't be able to function." At every job I had during college, the manager was always super understanding the first time. But when I had to call out or leave early about once a month for the same reason, people started to doubt me, even though it was completely real. Story 53. This didn't happen at work, but when I was a kid. One morning, I told my mom I wasn't feeling well and wanted to stay home from school. She didn't believe me right away and took my temperature using one of those old-school thermometers you keep under your tongue for a few minutes. When she checked it, she got upset and accused me of trying to fake being sick by heating up the thermometer. She thought I had held it near a light bulb or something to trick her. She said, "I'm going to take your temperature again, and this time I'm going to sit right here and watch to prove you did something." So I sat there, thermometer under my tongue, while she watched me the whole time. When the time was up, she looked at it and nearly passed out. My temperature was 105.5 degrees Fahrenheit. She rushed me to the hospital, where they found out I had pneumonia. At one point, my fever even reached 106.9 degrees Fahrenheit, and I was so out of it that I became delusional. Luckily, I had no brain damage or long-term effects. Story 54. One day, my family called my job saying there was an emergency and they needed me to come home right away. I rushed over, thinking something serious had happened. And well, it had kind of. Turns out my mom had replaced the water filter in the fridge and accidentally did something wrong. Water was spraying everywhere. It had flooded the kitchen, made its way into the garage, and was even pouring down the driveway. I ran in, took off my soaked pants, checked the problem, and quickly put the old filter back in to stop the leak. Then I dried off, changed, and went straight back to work. I had gone just 5 or 10 minutes into my 30-minute break and got back about 10 minutes late. But hey, being 21 and the only guy in a house with 3 women has its moments. Story 55. This isn't my story, but a friend's. There was a young apprentice on their job site who had a habit of being late, not showing up, and messing things up. His excuses were always ridiculous. Things like forgetting to buy work boots or leaving his tools at home, even though they were supposed to stay at the site. He didn't seem to care much, probably because his dad was an important person in the company. One day, he didn't show up again. My friend was really frustrated and spent the whole day saying he was done with him, that he'd fire him no matter what. Even the other workers were joking about the guy behind his back. Later that afternoon, they found out the apprentice had actually been hit and killed by a garbage truck that morning. The whole mood on the site changed instantly. Nobody was joking anymore. Story 56. This didn't happen to me, but to a former coworker. About a year ago, she called in sick and said she was in the hospital. People at work were skeptical, since she had a known history with substance issues, and many assumed she had just gotten into some kind of trouble. A week later, her boyfriend called the store with an update. He said she had gotten out of the hospital, and they decided to celebrate by drinking on the roof of their house. While up there, she slipped and fell, landing on the only paved area below. She hit the back of her head and injured her spine. She was rushed to the ICU and stayed there for another week. Thankfully, she ended up with just a severe concussion and some cuts and scrapes. But since the fall looked suspicious, the hospital placed her under observation for mental health concerns. When she was finally released, she took time to speak with each of us, co-workers and managers, to explain what really happened. She said the first hospital visit was due to an internal injury caused during an intimate moment gone wrong. It was serious enough that she needed surgery and bed rest. Then, yes, she really did climb onto the roof and get drunk. And yes, she really did fall off and land hard. It was a wild story, and definitely one of the most unexpected things I've ever heard from a coworker.